afternoon. My name is Ben Wright, and I'm a volunteer for the Veterans Breakfast Club, which is primarily based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But with the internet, we have a worldwide reach, and we have podcasts as well as in-person events and Monday evening happy hours. And today, as a guest, we have Matthew Landis, who is a U.S. Air Force veteran. And so we're pleased to have Matthew with us, and we'll get him to share some about his service. And he's got some after service things that he does for veterans that we'll share, he'd like to share as well. So, Matthew, first of all, how come you joined the Air Force?
Well, we're going to dive right into it, ain't we?
Sure.
Oh man, I got to tell you, I came from a family that has had done nothing but serve our great country. My father, John Landis, was a United States Navy veteran. He was on one of the first nuclear submarines. My grandfather, Edward Micah, is a World War II veteran, United States Navy. He was on a submarine destroyer that was the USS Natchez, and they were in the news for he blew up. They were able to successfully destroy one Japanese sub. That the story is just fantastic. How they took days and days and days pursuing this submarine, and he would share little bits about information with me when I was a child. So he had 9 brothers growing up in upstate New York, and every single one of them, including him, served in some way in one branch or another in the military. So it was kind of always on my heart. And I grew up right by West Point. I mean, right outside the gates of West Point is a small town of Highland Falls, New York. And I grew up there, and I literally could hear on every Sunday during football season, I could hear the games. And my mother became one of the first female athletic directors at West Point. She covered all the football operations for Army. So I grew up around military people. And my grandfather was by far one of the most influential and kind people in my life. He was a true inspiration. So before the Air Force, I had picked up a basketball, and I'm 6'6", and I had a scholarship to play at Springfield College in Massachusetts. And it must have not been the Lord's plan for me, because I went down on spring break my freshman year, and I remember I was right by Eglin Air Force Base, and I remember watching the F-15 Eagles take off, and I was blown away. I was just fascinated by them. And one of the places we were staying, there was a enlisted man in the Air Force, and I remember seeing him every day. We'd staying down there for a few weeks, and this guy was sharp. He had a nice car, he had a sharp uniform, he had some good looking chicks following around and everything. And he said to me once, he's like, "You're an air, why don't you have you ever thought about coming in the military?" And he just planted a seed inside of me that when I decided basketball wasn't the way I was going to go, my mother and I sat down one time, and she asked me what I was going to do with my life if I didn't want to play basketball anymore. I had gotten injured at Springfield. I broke my ankle. And she said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm going to join the Air Force." And I went and took my ASVABs, scored well enough. And I raised my hand, and I was in 1989, and wound up being the best decision I ever made.
Well, good. Well, tell us a little bit about your Air Force experience. Things you enjoyed, what your career field was, those sorts of things.
Yeah. So I went in what they call open. I'm sure you know it, enlisted as open general. So it was up to them to pick my career. And I somehow got lucky, and they gave me a career field that I could really use as a civilian, which was an HVAC, heating, air conditioning, and ventilation, so under the civil engineer category. So heating, air conditioning, and refrigeration specialist, and which carries over a lot into other areas, electrical and plumbing and whatnot. And so I was an HVAC specialist as and went in, like I said, general. So I, I still don't know how I was able to catch such a great. My friends were getting things, career fields like, working on Tomahawk missiles and things. So I hit the jackpot and scored a career field that really I knew nothing about. I knew nothing about heating and air conditioning. Growing up in New York, when it was time for air conditioning, you just turned the switch on. But the Air Force took you from this is a Phillip head screwdriver, through the science and the physics of refrigeration. And I was super fortunate to land a career field that really opened up a lot of doors for me. So I was right out of basic training. Technically, my first assignment was to Cheyenne Air Force Base in Colorado Springs. And somehow during my transition from tech school, I got reassigned to Buckley Air National Guard Base, which is now Buckley Air Force Base. Now, Buckley was a subsidiary of Lowry Air Force Base in Colorado, which is now gone. It's now closed. It's all shopping malls and whatnot. So here I was 18, 19 years old in Colorado and an HVAC specialist. And it couldn't have been a year before that I was playing basketball for Springfield College. So quite a life change. And I will say the one thing, if I had to pick one thing out of my military career that absolutely helped me more than anything, was the discipline and the respect that I needed to learn as a young man for authority, and to learn yes or no, sir, and to treat people with respect. I grew up in a real rough neighborhood, and just to me, had no real father figure besides my grandfather in my life. So I really didn't have any respect. So the Air Force took care of that real quick. And I was assigned with a group of gentlemen there that really, I'd say, and they made sure that we follow basic training to the core. So they were real strict on their good commander. And I was able to stay out of trouble, good conduct medal, and all those things because of the discipline that was instilled upon me in basic training and technical school, and then carried over at Lowry or at Buckley Air National Guard Base. So had a good career field, landed a very, very good first base, which was actually became my only assignment. I did my 4 years there. And then when it came time to re-enlist, I remember it was my decision at the time was absolutely, I was going to re-enlist. Now, at the time, it was President Clinton had decided they were doing major cutbacks, and they were closing bases all over, Lowry, one of them. And when I went into it, the sergeant, I remember sitting with him and I went to re-enlist, and he said, if you want to re-enlist, we'd love to keep you. You're a great airman, but you'd have to go back to tech school. And I was blown away. I just could not comprehend why. And what they were doing was they were outsourcing and they were civilianizing all of the civil engineering department worldwide. They were just contracting out to get people out. If you remember, they began early retirement. They were often offering people with I think it was 17 years or more away to retire early. And a bunch of people were jumping. They were downsizing the military, and I just got caught in the time where I had to make a decision. And my first daughter of 3 had just been born, and I remember thinking, go back to tech school, for 4 months or 5 months, 6 months, or I can check out the civilian world and just see what's out there. And that's where the training I had being in the civil engineer department and an HVAC specialist really, really came in as a positive thing in my life, because it was not hard to find a job, although it was difficult for me to transition from having daily discipline to having virtually none. So that's kind of how I wound up in the HVAC specialist, if that kind of makes sense.
Sure. Well, any particular things that you did while you were at Buckley?
Well, we were always in training, and we had harvest bear trainings. And what we would do is, so we practiced the design of runways and building tent villages year round. So in all conditions, we would have uh, portable heating and air conditioning units for the pilots. So they always had temperature controlled uh, environments to sleep in. So we would practice setting up tent cities so that on the deployment, we were ready to go. Everything was packed, and literally, you could at a phone call's in the middle of the night at a phone call's notice, we were ready to take off and deploy to be able to set up for aircraft to be landed anywhere in the world, especially in someone's backyard where they didn't want us.
Yeah, just to add to what Matthew's saying, the bare base concept was that you had a runway and a water supply, and you could deploy and go operational. When I was at Bitburg Air Base in Germany, when Desert Storm started, we deployed the F-15 wing. Half of them went to Saudi Arabia, and that's exactly what they did.
Yes,
They
sir.
went, they had an airstrip, and they lived in tents, and the civil engineers went and set it up. So
Yeah.
what Matthew's talking about has been used in the real world.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and all weather conditions too.
Oh yeah. Any other unique things that you did at Buckley, which in very recent years has become part of Space Force?
Yeah, that's a new I've been out so long that maybe you could probably tell me more about that, but we were a different command at the time, but we were in charge of, if you ever and you and I had spoke previously, but the satellite communications there were critical during the Gulf War. So there were monstrous antennas that today would probably could do from a phone. What was recorded. So every missile launch, every Scud missile being released could be tracked. And inside these domes were massive amounts of heat that they would produce. So keeping a temperature controlled unit inside those was very, very critical. And whenever there was a power outing and we lost power frequently, our base was fully prepared for not only they were a branch off of the Cheyenne, which could take a direct nuclear hit, and we were set up for a full radiation hit, so that if there was a nuclear attack, the radiation from it could not penetrate the facility in which we worked, so that we could maintain constant heat, cooling, and air conditioning for mission critical satellites. So we were constantly challenging for those, and there, certainly were a few times when it wasn't a lot of fun going in at 2 o'clock in the morning as a new father, to do those types of training. But I never had an instance that I can look back and say, gee, I wish this would have happened differently. I think the Lord just was on top of my career and had set me up for success, during my military career, so that it could carry over and be able to help other people in their careers as what I do now is kind of a veterans life coach and try to help veterans get through some trauma.
Well, good. Well, we certainly want to talk about what you're doing now as a veterans life coach. Well, you indicated that it was an interesting transition for you
Yes,
from
sir.
the Air Force civilian life, having a disciplined, structured thing, to now it's unstructured and you're on your own. So,
Oof.
how'd that go?
Oh man, that was a rough one for me. That was a rough one. So I, growing up where I grew up in New York, right outside West Point, I never had the discipline in my life. And then I get put into in the military. For me, my experience was to get into this structure that is so designed to work to perfection that if you simply just follow what they tell you to do, you're set up success. But in the civilian life, I couldn't find that. I lost camaraderie, I think, was probably the biggest thing. I was associated, like in the military, with a chain of command, and that was very important, and to the foundation of how the success of the mission. And then you get into the civilian life, and the mission became about money. Financial gain was always more important than and really that's what it seemed like the mission was almost every place I go to work. So I struggled with building relationships again with people that I looked up to, that were mentors to me, that I trusted. And I had a difficult time. It wasn't getting a job that I had a hard time with, or my resume looked solid, especially being an air cadet, but it was the transition into a civilian structured lifestyle that I didn't seem to fit in well. And even to this day, sometimes, I am so blessed to have served and understand what it means, to work under a system that's designed the way the military is. Teaches you respect. It teaches you what authority means. And I just feel that this country is lacking in that, especially in our younger children today. I always say, if until a young man serves, it's some of the political things out there today just get thrown around without any aspect of what it means to serve our country. So, yeah, going civilian was a struggle for me. I had a hard time with it.
Okay, well, if you became a life coach, you probably had some events along the way that called you that. Did you initially go into HVAC or not?
Yeah, well, I did. I wound up with a company in Aurora, Colorado, that they I wound up being in charge of all their maintenance. So thank goodness, with HVAC and civil engineering, heating and air conditioning, in order to do that, you're trained to be able to do a lot of other things, such as electrical and plumbing, and just there's some construction involved. There's soldering, there's brazing. So any of that starts to look good on a resume. So this company I had worked for, they picked up on that, and I wound up being in charge of doing all the residential maintenance for a 750 unit complex in Aurora, Colorado. So yeah, the HVAC career field definitely carried over into that. That's kind of what you were asking.
Sure. Well, good.
Yeah.
Well, anything else you want to share to us about your life as a veteran?
Well, it was a blessing. It seemed to me that it went by too fast, and when I couldn't wait to get out, but I also couldn't wait to, once I found out they said you can reenlist, but you have to go back to tech school. I couldn't wait to get out. But man, I almost look back and wish I stayed in, uh, talking to you this morning, people that have done 20 years, I kind of missed out on that. So if you're in there now and you're thinking about reenlisting, I always encourage you to make a long thought out, educated guess. So,
Well, good. So how did you become a life coach?
well, I will tell you, it was not easy. I've gone through a series of events in my life since becoming a civilian that I look back on, and I will just say, um, I got caught up in a very, very series of bad decisions, and I wound up becoming fully under addiction. And in 2015, I wound up homeless in Atlanta, Georgia. So I was the guy, I was the veteran on the side of the road that had the sign that said, uh, Air Force veteran, please help. I needed money. So I was the guy on the side of the road that begged for money so that I could drink and drug my way through my day. And I did that for over 12 years. I In 2015, I was in a Burger King parking lot on my birthday in Atlanta, Georgia. And for the very first time, I overdosed. And I had just met a girl. I didn't know. And I observed what it was like to stick a needle in your arm. And I decided to make the same choice. And I woke up with a bag on my mouth, surrounded by EMTs, laying on the concrete in this Burger King parking lot with glass everywhere. And they were literally pumping air into my lungs. I had overdosed on heroin, and they had shot me twice with Narcan, and I was non-receptive. And they were able to stabilize me in the back of the ambulance. And I remember the ambulance, the EMT, she rode in the ambulance with me. We got to the hospital, and I remember waking up. I was going in and out of laughter consciousness. I remember waking up laughing, of all things. This woman stayed with me until I got stabilized enough in my mind. And she looked at me, and I remember she looked exactly like my mom. And she said to me, it was the first time somebody hit me right upside the face and just said, "What are you doing with your life? You're an Air Force veteran. You're homeless. You're down here in Atlanta, Georgia. Your family's looking for you. Your daughters don't know where you are. You've fallen off the face of the earth. No, you're in trouble. You just overdosed and you don't even know it." And I remember her telling me, "Honey, with this Southern Georgia accent, you were gone. If we had not got there, you wouldn't be here." And she said something that changed my life. She said, "I don't know if you're open to it, but if there's a organization here called the VA that can help you." And at that time, I had no association with, in 2000, before 2003, I had no association with the VA whatsoever. So I walked into the VA in 2015. When I say walk, my car was repossessed from that incident. I had no money. I had nothing. I walked from that hospital to the front door of the VA on July 22nd, 2015, and checked myself into a rehab. And that became the beginning of an 8-year battle of addiction that I was kicked out of different hospitals, kicked out of facilities, you name it. I went from Florida, Dallas, Texas, Denver, Colorado, New York, all these different VAs, getting in trouble, getting kicked out, and I could not get my life in order. And, you know, I remember being down in Georgia, and on a Sunday, I had walked into a Baptist church with a group of veterans. And for the first time in my life, I heard a group of people singing and praising that I had never experienced before. I had grown up Catholic in New York, where sit and stand and kneel and pray. And I was atheist. I didn't believe in the Lord whatsoever. I mean, I had no relationship with Christ, none at all. But after I walked into that Sunday, and the people there were so kind to me, a complete stranger. I remember being hugged by someone I hadn't met, and someone telling me, "I love you," for the first time. And I thought, did that person just say, "I love you"? They don't, like, I didn't know me. I was not used to that type of that type of affection. So that was my first introduction to having a relationship with a higher power. So in that process of getting my life together, I'm getting kicked out of different VAs around the country. I just kept hitting rock bottom after rock bottom after rock bottom, and legal troubles. I'd spent many nights in jail, more than I probably remember. And so here I had legal trouble, financial trouble. Like, I was full blown in addiction. I had no relationship with my family. I had no relationship with Jesus. I had no clue what I was doing with my life. And a lot of this is from pre-military service. So childhood trauma, regardless of what you may think or you may have thought about it, But trauma, in my instance, in my case, in my life, trauma can manifest itself in many ways in the human body, mentally and physically. And for me, if it was both. So my troubles were throwing fuel on fire, magnified out of control, just completely out of control. So I wound up getting accepted into a VA recovery program in Sheridan, Wyoming, at the Sheridan VA Medical Center up there. And I will tell you, the people there helped save my life. I was kicked out of there at least 3 times before I finally got my stuff together. So I can share more about that if you'd like, but that is the basis of how I became a veterans life coach. It's more now about what I do to help other veterans that are in that same situation. There's no story that a veteran can share with me that would shock me. There's nothing that would scare me, that they would feel that they need to hide, because there's nothing that I can honestly say that I haven't experienced or done that would throw me off course. My goal now is to turn the mess that I made into a message, and that is that you can heal. It takes people, it takes love, and it takes faith. So no matter what you believe in a higher power, you have to have something bigger than yourself. And for me, it became my relationship with Jesus Christ. But that's how I fell off the planet Earth in 2015.
So you might, if you're willing to share with us,
Yes,
you
sir.
know, what you do as a life coach, and how do the
Absolutely.
veterans get assigned to you, and how do you come
Yeah.
in contact with people, and how all that works?
Yes. So a cool story is, how did he get better? Right. Well, here I am at the VA in Sheridan, Wyoming. Now, if you've been there, which we had talked about, you've been out to Wyoming, you know that Sheridan, Wyoming is right at the base of the Bighorn National Forest. Now, because I was stationed in Colorado, I fell in love with one thing more than anything else, and that was the mountains. I loved going to the mountains, taking pictures, and I spent time camping. I was a guide, and for 5 years, I was a guide for elk hunters archery season out in Colorado after my military service. Well, I lost all that in 2015 when I was on drugs and on the streets of Atlanta. And I'd go up there and I'd hike and heal, and I'd hike and I'd heal. And one morning, I was, excuse me, I was outside about 2 a.m. and I was sitting with a peer support. And he said to me, "You always go into the mountains to heal. Why don't you do like a long distance hike sometime? When you get out of here, you always get in trouble when you finish therapy. Why don't you go do something different?" And I was like what? He said, "Why don't you think about hiking the Pacific Crest Trail?" I had never heard of the Pacific Crest Trail. So it is a 2,653-mile trail that goes from Canada through California, Canada, Washington, Oregon, and the entire state of California, all the way to Mexico. So in 2018, in May, I made the decision that I was going to get a backpack I already had some of the gear. I was going to get my gear, and I was going to go hike this thing called the PCT. And I remember going to the VA thinking, they're not going to support me. This is crazy. The VA, they want me to get a job. They want me to go back to school. They have me on medications that I need to be monitored. I need to be, I have to follow the rules. And I had done it before so many times, and I got kicked out that I needed to change. I needed something different. Well, I went to the VA, and I remember saying, "This is what my plan is." And their reaction to this day, I am blessed to hear. The first words they said was, "How can we help you? What can we do to help?" And we put up a plan together to get from Wyoming to Washington so I could get southbound on that trail. So on July 8th in 2018, I set southbound on the Pacific Crest Trail and hiked 2,653 miles all the way to Mexico. Now, in 2019, after I finished that trail, I became one of less than 100 people in the world that have done the PCT twice. So I went back up to Washington and hiked the trail southbound again. So together between the 2 years of 2018 and 2019, I've hiked over 5,000 miles on that trail. What happened on the second trail changed the course of my life. And that was that I began to have a group of veterans following me on social media. The guys that were back at the VA that I had just left, they were all texting me, and their friends were texting me. How do I do what you're doing? How can I go hike like you? How, I want it. I need something different. I don't want to go get a regular job. I don't want to follow the program to the T. How can I do it? So my calling in 2019 began with trying to help veterans find a way to do something in the outdoors for their mental health. And next thing you know, there's veteran after veteran. There's sponsorships after sponsorship. There's companies that are reaching out to me that to this day I have built wonderful relationships with that help veterans in every way, whether it's the gear they need, the money they need, however they need to get from where they're at. My goal is to help them put together a plan to find the outdoor, to use the outdoors as a platform to give their minds room for all this stuff that we're taught to work. A lot of times when you go through, my experience, when you go through these rehab programs, it's wonderful to be given the tools to be able to heal, but to be able to apply them, it takes time and it takes space in your mind for God, for my experience, for God to work. And I couldn't find a place for that in a city. I could not find a place for that in Sheridan, Wyoming. But I found it out there it took me 5 months each time to hike 20 miles a day. So that became my calling. Crystal clear that God said all the streets of homelessness in Atlanta and Dallas and New York and in Florida, all of that was given to you, and you didn't serve, you were not made a victim of it. You were made a overcomer of it so that I can use you for a specific purpose. And that is to be able to share that, first of all, the story of who got me out of there. Because now I got to tell you, when I changed my focus, stopped looking for who I am and started realizing whose I was, that's when my life began to change. So I try to help veterans use the outdoors as a platform for their mind to have some room for God to work. Everybody needs a break. You know, you come out of therapy and you just had 8 weeks clean, and your first thing you do, you walk out the gate, and all of a sudden it's just like going from the military world to the civilian world. You've lost relationships, you've lost order, you've lost a plan that you do from 9 to 5 every day, and now you're on your own. And that is those first 3 days are the most critical days for relapse when it comes to overcoming addiction. Those first 72 hours after you complete a program are absolutely critical. And so my mission has become to help veterans have a plan to be somewhere, to do something in those first 72 hours, even if it's putting on a backpack and just going for a hike with another group of veterans. It gives your mind time to heal. It gives your brain space to absorb what's been happening in your life and to be able to slowly make some of the changes that you need to make. So it's been a process. It's taken a lot of time. I've been surrounded by a lot of loving, caring people that have done nothing but try to help me live and stay alive. And by the grace of God, I've been able to take, this life that I had wrecked and rebuild relationships. And if there's one thing I know that I've learned, I'll be 54 next month. And if there's one thing I've had absolutely positive of in my life, is that life is about relationships and love. We are here to help each other. And it took me the bottom of a lot of jail cells and a lot of bad situations to go through to realize that I was not here for me. I was here to help other people. So,
well, that's wonderful that you're able to help other veterans. And now you're working with currently with a veterans organization that kind of channels veterans to you to work with?
Yeah. So there's two that I'd like to mention. Actually, three. The next month, there's a group in Colorado called No Barriers, nobarriers.org. And they've been doing what I'm building for over 10 years. They take veterans, all expenses paid, on backcountry expeditions. And next month, I'm flying out there on July 13th, and I'm going on a trip with them for a week to learn and hopefully help facilitate, with some of my experiences. So the No Barriers organization is one I'm becoming affiliated with out of Colorado. Another one here in Maine, excuse me, is called VAST, VAST. The VAST is the Veterans Adaptive Sports Training Program. And they help veterans with all types of backgrounds, all types of age groups, disabilities. They help them do everything from horseback riding, cycling. Here in Maine, man, it's like an outdoorsman's paradise. We have the ocean, we got fishing, hunting, and everything. So they surround veterans with outdoor opportunities for those that are up here in Maine. Now, the last one I very much associate with is a group called 220.org. 220 is a nonprofit organization built to get that number of 22 veterans a day that commit suicide to zero. 220.org. They are a free veterans. I would not call them a crisis platform organization. I would call them I'll just share what they did for me. I struggled with anxiety and stress and PTS so much that I was living in constant fight or flight. I just could not get through my days. And they, through how you and I are doing, through a Zoom, through a meeting, they help veterans go through about an hour's program that literally helps you to rewire and look at your life situation through a different focus. And it is a 99% success rate they're having with veterans that are experiencing life trauma. And again, they're free. If you just go to 220.org, they're completely committed to getting the number of veterans a day that are committing suicide down to zero. They're fantastic people. All three groups that I mentioned are just wonderful people that I've been able to be associated with.
Oh, good. Well, thank you for sharing that. Before we close out, when we were visiting one another before we started recording this interview, I learned that you had a helper dog, and
Yeah.
people are always interested in helper dogs.
Yeah.
If you don't mind sharing with us
Can
about
I?
the helper dog,
Oh,
please
please.
do.
Yeah. So before I show him, because he's going to jump all over this, but so if you're a veteran looking for a service dog, I waited 3 years, and I believe that it was not the right time in my life. It took me getting sober for the path for my service dog and I across. So his name is Kauai, and it's after the island in Hawaii, like Kauai. And if you're considering a service dog, let me tell you, if you're especially if you're having trouble connecting with an organization that can get you one, please reach out to me, and we'll give you a way to be able to do that. But Kauai has absolutely changed the course of my life. We travel everywhere, we fly everywhere together, and he's an inspiration for me. Put it this way, he gets me up in the morning, and when it's time to go outside, it's time for me to get my butt up and going. And we run hard, we play hard, and he is my best friend in the world. This is Kauai. Say hi.
Hi, Kauai.
He's a good boy.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, he's a border collie Newfoundland. So he's 86 pounds of pure muscle. And when he wants to play, he's serious.
So he'll wrestle with you.
He'll wrestle, he'll play. He gives he gives almost that discipline of when it's time to be active, it's time to be active. But he was trained for me for seizures. So I developed having seizures, and he's a seizure dog. He can alert me up to an hour before I have a seizure, and he'll nudge me, literally put his his nose in my belly button. He can push me over, knock me down, or sit me down, and literally make sure I'm in a safe space. I have not had it. I got him 2.5 years ago. I have not had a seizure since the day I got him.
Well,
So
wonderful.
I know that's why I've seen him be trained. I've trained with him for it, but we've not experienced one together. So thank goodness.
Well, wonderful. That's great.
Yeah,
Hey, any
he's
last
awesome.
thing before we stop recording that you want to share about your either your active duty Air Force experience or veteran experience?
Just that uh, it was an absolute honor to serve my country and to be able to follow in the footsteps of my father and my grandfather. It was a wonderful an honor. And so I always say to, especially to young kids, young men and women that are thinking of a career path, looking for something they may want to do, I highly, highly recommend exploring the United States military because it gives you the tools that you need to be able to succeed in society. And, it was a flat out honor to be able to serve the greatest country in the world.
Well, wonderful. That's a great way to close.